from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Tonight, breaking news, the president leaning toward a Fed chair pick. The moves just within the last hour. On the race for Fed chair, with the Wall Street Journal now out with this report just a short time ago, the headline reading, quote, Trump says he is leaning toward Warsh or Hassett to lead the Fed. The president telling the Journal in an interview, former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh or National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett are at the top of his list, saying, quote, they're both, I think the two Kevins are great. Noticeable inclusion of Warsh today, coming just hours after J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon signals his support for Warsh in a closed-door event. Joining us now for more off the top here is Bloomberg's Washington Deputy Bureau Chief Laura Davison. That's a pretty short list. So it does come down to the so-called Kevins, as we've been hearing for months.
Yes, this has been a really interesting evolution from the president. Just a couple weeks ago, he was saying he was certain he'd made his pick. He'd narrowed it down to one.
Yeah.
Now we're hearing a Trump who is a lot less certain, and probably two reasons for this. One, Trump does not like to make any personnel decisions until the very last moment. He likes to keep us all guessing. And because of that, number two is that he can kind of keep these candidates sort of pitted against each other, competing to make sure he's absolutely certain that he likes who he's chosen. He, very notably had buyer's remorse after picking Jay Powell in his first term.
Yes, notably indeed. Now, we know that final interviews were taking place with the boss this week. Would the re-emergence of Warsh at the top of the list suggest that those interviews brought him forward again?
It certainly does. He met with him on Wednesday. He said that he got this assurance from Warsh that he wanted to lower interest rates. This, of course, has been the number one thing that the president has really wanted to see. So this is, also coming at the time when Wall Street, notably Jamie Dimon, is not very enthusiastic about Hassett.
Yeah.
We had reported Hassett was this front runner, but as this has gone on, in some ways, Trump likes to have these trial balloons that he puts out there to see how people respond. This allows him to give him more maneuvering room to pick someone.
That's great. We're still, though, expecting an announcement early next year. Is that still the case?
It could come at any time.
Yeah.
Trump has suggested he might wait till early next year, but he, the seat doesn't officially open up until the end of January, so he could even push it later in the month.
Got it. Laura Davison with breaking news at Bloomberg in Washington. We thank you. Meantime, the other big news gripping the city here and the tech world is the president's moves on AI, signing an executive order blocking state-level AI regulations and handing a policy win to tech industry leaders who've pressed for preemption of local rules. For details on this, we turn to Bloomberg's Michael Shepard with us here in our Washington bureau. An EO is one thing, but of course it can be undone pretty easily. Mike, does he not need the help of Congress here?
He does. And in fact, he has said, and the order specifies, that the administration led by White House AI czar David Sachs, who happens to be a venture capitalist, joining the administration this year, they would work with lawmakers to craft what a legislative framework would be. Now, in this order that was signed and released late yesterday, we did not get much of a sense of what those guardrails would actually look like, Joe. It seemed to be not very specific, as you might otherwise expect when you hear those two words put together, legislative framework. For instance, how would copyright and privacy and all these other safety and child safety issues be addressed? Instead, the overriding message seems to be that, look, we cannot have 50 different state rules that companies have to comply with. And that was something we even heard David Sachs talk about earlier today on Bloomberg Tech.
A lot of states' attorneys general have made careers out of suing Donald Trump, suing the White House first term, now the second term. Is that where this is all going? We track 50 separate lawsuits?
Well, late last night, we heard from California State Senator Scott Wiener, who crafted the Golden State's AI law, the one that Gavin Newsom signed into effect in September. He said in a statement that if the Trump administration tried to pull this off, in other words, taking aim at California's new rules, there would be a lawsuit waiting to happen against the administration, against the Justice Department. They see it as an overreach, and the states really see their job as stepping in where the federal government so far has not. And the truth really is, Joe, that members of Congress have struggled to find consensus on this in a comprehensive way. And what that has left the federal government with is really trying to use existing authorities to regulate a technology that is so new and so evolving and so critical to the economy. And the whole reason for this order really is that, the president has made AI a centerpiece of his economic agenda. The building of those data centers, the need to break ground on all of those chip-making plants as well to help power the AI agenda. And yet there is some risk in this as well for the president and his party heading into next year's midterm elections. Voters are not embracing this new technology with the same degree of enthusiasm as the president and some of his advisors and the tech industry leaders that have approximated themselves to the administration. Voters are concerned about job losses, they're concerned about privacy and all those other issues. And there is the pocketbook question, Joe, too, and that is electricity prices. They're up 7.4% on a year-over-year basis. And we're just getting started with the data center build-out. And they are so power-hungry. And this is something the administration has targeted. But again, it does come down to a lot of local regulation on that front.
Shep, thank you. As always, Bloomberg's Michael Shepard on the case for us this evening as we turn to the way the investment community is feeling about all of this. Closing out the week on Wall Street with stocks tumbling today as traders' AI bets took a big hit. Big tech stocks like NVIDIA and Broadcom, which was out with earnings after the bell yesterday, fell as the AI trade lost steam. New doubts today, new questions about a bubble and how all this spending is going to land. With details, we turn to power moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Not a very fun ride today, Romaine.
No, and some of the seeds of that we talked about yesterday, Joe, with those earnings that we got out of Broadcom, and more importantly, some commentary on the conference call out of that chip maker where they dodged a lot of questions about profitability and refused to actually give a revenue outlook for their AI business specifically. You throw into that a Bloomberg scoop earlier today about Oracle potentially delaying the build out of some OpenAI data centers by 1 year to 2028. And it was a big reason why you saw a big downdraft in a lot of these stocks. A lot of stocks in the AI and tech space that are now either in correction territory or bear market territory. To put a finer point on it, keep in mind some of the biggest names this year, Joe, since the end of October are down significantly. Microsoft, NVIDIA down 10%, Dell and AMD down about 20%, Oracle down about 30%, and that, of course, dragged the broader market down along with it. The rise in yields that we saw today was a big part of that as well. As yields go up, it changes the valuation on equities for the worse, and that was a big part of it as well. I also want to point out, too, that when we talk about this intersection of what's been going on in Washington, some of the executive orders and the other potential regulations that are designed to help this industry, I asked some people about this earlier today, Joe, and their consensus right now that this might be a little bit too little, too late, as investors have really moved on. They're really much more focused on underlying fundamentals like profitability and top-line revenue growth, not so much about the support that these companies might get from the federal government.
Fascinating. What a concept, Romaine. Thank you. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick. After a tough week on the markets, we'll see you back here on Monday. Joining us now with his reaction to the news on the Federal Reserve pick that is apparently in the making here, with two names again at the top of the list. The two Kevins. Republican Congressman Jay Obernolte of California joins us, a member of both the House Budget Committee and House Science, Space, and Tech Committees. Congressman, great to see you. Welcome to Bloomberg TV and radio. What's your thought on this? Do you and your fellow members of Congress have a preferred candidate here between these two Kevins? Should Warsh or Hassett run the Fed?
Honestly, I think that the administration is doing a fantastic job at vetting these two potential nominees. And I think that the president is asking all the right questions about who is best suited to catalyze the continued leadership of America in our economy, in our international competition. And so I'm really looking forward to see which way he leans.
Well, we sure are. And we'd love to know ourselves as we address the issue we were just discussing with Michael Shepard, the EO that the president signed last evening on AI regulations, creating a blanket regulation for the nation that would override or prevent states from having their own competing regulations. As a Republican, I just wonder your thoughts on this, if the party is leaning away from states' rights as a priority in this case.
Well, to be clear, two things. First of all, the president did not create the regulation. What he said is he wants to work with Congress in creating the regulation, which is, I think, the appropriate path, the constitutional path. And the other thing that I think it's important to say is that no one thinks that states shouldn't have a role to play in the regulation of AI. But what we are saying is that there'll be a lane for the states and a lane for the federal government. And under Article 1 of our Constitution, it's made clear that Congress is the appropriate entity to regulate interstate commerce. And And so what we're saying is that Congress needs to go first. We need to define where those guardrails are. What is interstate commerce? What is preempted for regulation only at the federal level? And then outside those guardrails, where are the states free to be the laboratories of democracy that they are?
Interesting. I know that before you were in Congress, you were a video game designer, Congressman. So you've got a good sense of the tech industry, and I know you've been very close to the AI community as a member from California when we consider the data centers that are popping up out of the earth like weeds. Does a national standard for AI hold up in court if we see a series of lawsuits from states?
Oh, absolutely. I think what the states are talking about is challenging unilateral executive branch action. But there have been many occasions where Congress has codified a preemptive single federal standard, and that will definitely hold up in court.
Well, you heard what we were discussing earlier with a promise from California, for instance. You think that attempts by states' attorneys general will fail?
Well, I think that more than challenging the federal government's ability to preempt, they'll be challenging other things in the executive order. For example, tying the BEAD internet infrastructure funding to a state's willingness to allow its laws to be preempted. And, you know, that's something that we can talk about. It's also important to note that several times in the executive order, the president used the phrase "to the extent permitted by federal law." So no one is trying to circumvent federal law here. And in some cases, I think the courts will sort it out. But honestly, I am hopeful that we in Congress can act quickly enough in cooperation with the White House to actually establish this standard. And that way, no one will have to worry about what the lanes are.
We just got news, Congressman, on health care. In your chamber, it does seem that the Republican leadership is going to permit a floor vote next week to extend the COVID-era Obamacare subsidies that are set to expire at the end of this month. Will you be a yes vote if that takes place?
Well, I haven't read the legislation. I have some concerns about Hyde Amendment provisions, and those are concerns that are shared by a lot of members of my conference. But I know that we're also going to be voting on a number of different other things that will bring down health insurance premiums. For example, association health plans, we want to make those easier so that self-insured people can get less expensive health insurance. We want to impose some transparency requirements on PBM managers, you know, the pharmaceutical watch guards that are in the middle, the middlemen. And we want to expand access to health savings accounts. And also cost-sharing reduction for low-income people. That alone will drive down health insurance premiums by an estimated 11%. So I think there's going to be some good work done in Congress before the end of the year.
Really interesting. Do you have a sense then, or are you hearing from your colleagues what a Republican plan would look like? Would it be a one-year extension that acknowledges the Hyde Amendment?
I think the official Republican plan is going to not revolve around these expiring tax credits, which, you know, by the way, don't go to consumers. They go straight to the insurance companies and really affect very few Americans. We would like to do some broader things that drive down health costs for everybody, and that's what I think you're going to see very quickly.
Are you comfortable telling constituents in your state, telling our audience that Congress will keep premiums from rising in the new year?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, what we've seen is the so-called Affordable Care Act has been anything but affordable. It's unaffordable. I think our health care system needs some systemic changes, particularly to get the middlemen out. Sometimes they soak up all that revenue. We have the best health care system in the world, I think, when it comes to our health care providers and delivery of health care, but one of the worst health care systems in the world when it comes to cost. We spend over twice as much per capita as other industrialized countries, 3 times as much as countries like Singapore with better healthcare outcomes. And so we need to adopt some systemic reforms that take the cost out while expanding access to healthcare to everybody. And I'm confident we can do that.
We've been talking a lot about redistricting, Congressman. I'm sure as a Californian, you have been as well. You're in a state that plans to redistrict here following Prop 50 ahead of the midterms. You saw what took place in Indiana yesterday. If this ends up being a wash between Democrats and Republicans, was this whole effort a waste?
Well, I've been very vocal in my opinion that mid-cycle redistricting is a bad idea for everybody. I think it erodes people's trust in the fairness of our elections and their underlying trust in our democracy. And so I did not support it when Texas did it, and I did not support it when the Democrats did it in California.
Well, it's good to have you back with us, Congressman. Let's stay in touch on these regulations. Republican Congressman Jay Obernolte of California, we thank you for the insights. Coming up, we'll turn back to our conversation on President Trump's executive order on AI and where the industry goes from here. The voice of an expert, Miriam Vogel, former chair of the National AI Advisory Committee, is with us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You have to have a central source of approval. When they need approvals of things, they have to come to one source. They can't go to California, New York, and various other places.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where we heard from President Trump last evening in the Oval Office. They're signing the executive order aimed at blocking state-level AI regulation. Joining us now here in our Washington bureau is Miriam Vogel, who's inaugural chair of the National AI Advisory Committee, and now president and CEO of Equal AI. It's great to have you with us on the Friday edition. Thanks for being here. Your book, Covering the Machine, How to Navigate the Risks of AI and Unlock Its True Potential, comes in handy right now. And I'm wondering your thoughts about this move from the White House and whether it can hold up in court.
It's a great question. We all certainly want to know the answer to that. And certainly I know many companies across the country are relieved today seeing that they may not have state compliance, a patchwork to comply with. But I think it's important we not lose sight of the bigger picture. The federal regulation is a key piece of governance, but governance is really a much larger issue. It's what's happening within the companies that in many ways only they will know. Another key piece of this is in the courts. While we're looking at the state houses, the courthouses are going to be determining a lot of what the regulations are going to be and the requirements.
Well, give us a sense of how far along the states are. We were just talking about the California law, for instance. Will this be interrupting laws already on the books or those being crafted?
Both. I mean, they went from 19 laws over a 5-year span, starting at the end of the teens, to 1,000 bills in the last across the states in the last year. So it's certainly a lot of work underway that will be impacted should this go through. But there's also as many issues to be litigated within the court in those various state courts as well as the federal courts.
What do you make of the argument from the White House that if we're going to keep up, and as Scott Bessent says, you know, there's no second place. It's pass-fail when you're competing with China in what is an industrial revolution in their eyes, in the eyes of a lot of investors who are watching and listening to us right now. Is he right? Because a couple of days ago, we were talking about selling H-200 chips to China.
We have to win. I think that's true.
Does it require a national standard?
I think there's questions there about what needs to be in place. I think the key gap, though, the part that we're all missing is the adoption piece. You're seeing all the headlines about the lack of return of investment that all the companies are finding. They're investing hundreds of millions in AI. Yeah. They're not getting a return on their investment, and that's because people are not trusting AI, and it's because we're not giving measurements and protocols to deserve those trusts through governance.
Interesting. You talk in the book here about navigating the risks of AI. And a lot of folks right now are wondering if it's a bubble, if this spending's ever going to land, if these companies can get the money to begin with that have been promised, if vendor financing is a real thing here. How are you looking at this moment? A lot of folks say we're in the first or second inning. Others think the AI trade is starting to peter out.
I do think we're in the early days of AI. Yeah. I think when we look at the discoveries we've made over the past few years since it's become widespread have been groundbreaking, and I think we're on track to see many more groundbreaking innovations that are going to be unthinkable. We certainly could not imagine today what we'll be seeing in AI with several years. However, we will not see widespread adoption if we don't do more at this critical moment to make sure that our AI is trusted.
You heard our conversation with Congressman Obernolte, pretty well versed on this stuff. He's very close to the community and has been working with a lot of the companies building data centers in places like Barstow in his district. This is not across the board on Capitol Hill, as you probably well know. We can start with the age of a lot of lawmakers. In some cases, their allergy to technology. What's the learning curve for a legislator that might be writing a national standard in the weeks ahead?
You're right. That's an issue. We need more AI literacy across the country, and particularly for the policymakers who are creating these regulations. I will say, in good news, we've come a long way. When we were talking about the Facebook hearings years ago, where the legislatures just did not understand what that technology was, we've come a long way through Representative Obernolte's work and several others through the AI caucus. They've done a lot to educate themselves and their staffers. At Equal AI, we've also had programs to train staffers and make sure they really understood what is working, what's not. How do you monitor? How do you evaluate generative AI, let alone narrow AI that is in most of the systems that people are using in their HR and otherwise?
Okay.
So we have come a long way. We absolutely have a long way to go.
Use cases could help a lot. When people start wondering, what is this for? We've got another version of ChatGPT, and they've got a lot of people paying for it. But when do we get to the point where this is starting to change lives?
I think that is such an important point, the use cases. I think we're failing by not giving people use cases that are more meaningful to them.
Is that a matter of a lack of imagination, or this is a communication effort that needs to begin?
I think it starts with a communication effort. It starts by meeting people where they are. What's a use case that's going to be meaningful to the mother in Oklahoma, the family in Michigan? I think we are not doing a good enough job of telling them use cases, but also I think we have to have a meaningful conversation. What are they afraid of? We see that 50% of Americans at a minimum are afraid of AI, more afraid than excited.
Sure.
If you break that down, there's gender gaps, there's regional gaps, there's age gaps, which starts at 30, by the way. So if we think about those gaps, who's self-selecting out of AI, what's keeping them afraid? We need to have a conversation about what is the risk that they're afraid of so that we can tell them about the opportunity in a way they'll believe.
The age gap starts at 30. Would that suggest people under 30 are not afraid of this technology and would be more likely to embrace it?
Much more excited and enthusiastic.
They're not worried about not having a job, because a lot of the stories here, if you're coming out of school right now, AI might have just gobbled up that position you would have had a couple of years ago. If you're a coder, forget about it.
I think the workforce displacement is top on most minds, particularly of the young people today, but it's not keeping them from trying it and using it in the way that it is for people over 30.
Okay.
And that's just one of, in our book, we have 9 categories of risk. Workforce displacement is huge, but for other people, the privacy concerns are equally huge. The security concerns, the hallucinations, each of these need to be addressed before different constituents are open to it. So that's why we think of governance as really the unlock for AI use.
When's the shakeout with these companies that are putting up massive deals and announcements every day? The rising tide lifts all boats until some of them begin to fail.
I think that's why we need to immediately act with governance and literacy. If more companies, 80–90% of companies are using AI, less than a third have a governance system in place. That means if you're in a company that's investing in putting all these AI tools out there, but not telling people what's a use that is sanctioned, what is a use that is not advisable, or what is a use that is absolutely not ever going to be permitted. If we're not explicit about what it is and how it's used, if we're not telling people how it's being tested, how we're making sure that it's safe for them inside the companies, let alone the consumers, we can never expect adoption.
Well, this is interesting. As more people have a personal experience with AI, does acceptance increase?
It's a really good point. We see the data shift significantly when people are more comfortable with AI. We see with the experts, 42% are more excited than concerned about AI. That is compared to 11% of the population. Wow. 72% believe it will help more than hurt them. That's in the 40s for the general population. So there's up to a quarter, 4 times more opportunity for engagement and trust if you understand it.
Really interesting. I love this conversation. Let's keep it going, because this story is only going to get bigger. That's Miriam Vogel, former chair of the National AI Advisory Committee, president, CEO, Equal AI, co-author of Governing the Machine. We thank you. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. We'll bring in our political panel in just a moment. First, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. A group of 19 states planning to sue the Trump administration to block the $100,000 fee for any new H-1B visa applications. Lawsuit alleging that the fee creates a costly and illegal barrier to using the visa program. which is a common avenue for U.S. employers to hire skilled foreign workers. They also contend that the $100,000 figure was set arbitrarily and exceeds the authority allowed by Congress. This would be the third legal complaint against the fee increase since President Trump announced it back in September. House Democrats have released a tranche of new photos from the estate of the late Jeffrey Epstein that include President Trump, former President Clinton, Bill Gates, Steve Bannon, and Larry Summers. The photographs are undated and show Trump before he became president. Here's one of them now. If you're with us on TV, White House spokeswoman Abigail Jackson criticized Democrats for the, quote, cherry-picked photos with random redactions to try to create a false narrative, unquote. Trump has repeatedly said that he cut ties with Epstein nearly 2 decades ago and was not aware of the late financier's activities. Representatives for Clinton, Gates, Bannon, and Summers did not immediately respond to requests for comment. These 19 photos are among 95,000 the Department of Justice produced, according to Congressman Robert Garcia, senior Democrat on the House panel investigating Epstein. Joining us now with their reaction to this and other stories we're following today. Our political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, our Republican strategist, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Our closers are back, and it's great to see you both. Happy Friday. Jeannie, a week from today, and this seems to have fallen off the front page, the deadline for the Department of Justice to release the Epstein files because of the law that President Trump signed a few weeks back. It started a clock ticking for 30 days, and here we are. Will the American public see them?
You know, it's hard to tell. I think this is the worst case scenario politically for the White House, is this sort of drip, drip, drip. That's what we've gotten today from the Democrats, 19 photos here, more photos here. Mm-hmm. Looks like they're going to continue. This is not what the White House wants politically. And of course, the answer to all of this, Joe, is release everything. Call for the release. But they haven't been able to do that, or they've been unwilling to do that. The law says they have to release by the 20th. We'll have to wait and see if they do. But this story is not going away. And I suspect the president's going to get some questions on Epstein if he takes questions at this bill signing this afternoon.
Yeah, that just might come up. It's been a minute. And Rick, the Democrats I mentioned, including Bill Clinton on that list, who appear in the photographs, are the reason why we may not see them, right? There is a thought in Washington that the attorney general will simply say, because the president ordered these investigations into others involved in Epstein's life, it's an ongoing probe, and, well, we can't release documents until it's over. Is that what happens in a week?
Reminder, these thousands of pictures are all coming from the estate, not from the DOJ. And so you're right. There's this massive dump that's supposed to take place. And I'm going to call it the Santa Claus effect. I think these guys in this administration would love to dump these files on Christmas Eve if they had their choice. So, if you're looking under the tree, you may just find tens of thousands of documents that are the Epstein files, because they don't want anybody talking about this. They don't want anybody reading these things. And they're going to make it as hard as humanly possible. So if they can find a way to delay it into the holiday itself, I think that would be their strategy. But they are under a court order to do it. So if we get some and not all, that'll just exacerbate the debate as to what are they holding back. So I know that their strategy would probably include claim that there's an investigation and we want to, not release these files. But that is going to create an uproar within the MAGA movement that is probably worse than if they just disgorged the documents like Jeannie's saying.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, based on some of the photos we've seen today, people are asking a lot of new questions about what exactly Donald Trump's relationship was with Jeffrey Epstein and who the women in these photographs are. Their faces have been blocked out for their privacy, Jeannie. This is all we're going to be talking about next week, right? So this creates kind of an interesting scenario for the president, because anything he does will start a conversation about the tail wagging the dog, right? I mean, if he takes action in Venezuela next week, that will be the first thing people say. That's why this becomes a political liability beyond the obvious, right?
Absolutely. And what doesn't make sense about any of this is you just look at what Mike Johnson did in the House, sending the House away. I think it was for over a month, almost 6 weeks. To what end? Nothing. We are still here, which is why this doesn't make sense as a way to handle a crisis. What do lawyers tell you? Tell the worst thing you have to say about your client, say it up front and get it out and move on. So to Rick's point, they really should do this. Now, I understand they would like nothing more than to wait till Christmas when we're all with our families and not interested in Epstein. But in this case, this thing has legs. It's not going anywhere. They should get on top of it and get it out quickly. I'm not understanding why they haven't been willing to do that, except the president has been holding back, and that has raised more questions than it's helped him.
Well, of course, scores of Republicans voted for that discharge petition that left the president no choice but to sign it. And when you start ticking off the list here, Rick, Epstein files, discharge, Indiana redistricting fails, new questions about war powers around Venezuela. I could keep going here. Healthcare. There are Republicans who are bucking the president right now. Is this something that we will look back on as a notable moment?
I think it's what you're saying could be the potential of a pretty severe break within the MAGA coalition. These issues and many more, as you point out, aren't issues that are really driving a partisan wedge. It's a debate within the party itself. And it's not seemingly getting any easier. In other words, one of the superpowers that Donald Trump had as a candidate was this echo chamber of influencers and podcasters and all these folks around the country that had massive millions and millions of people, listening to them and feeding out what a great guy Donald Trump was. Now they're feeding out how they attack each other. And that kind of dissemination within the ranks is incredibly unhealthy. And you don't really see a galvanizing issue that can bring them all back together again. And so I think it could be the beginning of a sort of, classic death by a thousand cuts kind of a scenario.
Jeannie, there was a meeting of the 5 families this morning. This is not a Godfather reference. Mike Johnson pulled together the so-called 5 families for a conversation. House Freedom Caucus, Republican Study Committee, Republican Governance Group, Main Street Caucus, Problem Solvers Caucus, to come up with a plan on what to do with health care reform. And as we discussed with Congressman Obernolte a short time ago, it does appear that a Republican bill will hit the floor next week. Is there still time to keep premiums from rising?
I'm going to try to be hopeful, Joe, but I really don't see it happening. Your conversation was so fascinating because one of the first things the congressman brought up was the Hyde Amendment. Well, if we are talking about that now, it's just days to go. It is going to be sticky. It is going to be hard. And, the Senate sort of threw up their hands yesterday. They are passing the ball over to the House. The House is going to give it a go. I'm not sure how this happens unless they get enough people in the middle to say, let's extend these subsidies for another 6 months, a year, and try this all over again next year. Even the president has been saying in the last several hours, well, maybe we can work with Democrats. The reality is this has been going on for so very long. Republicans have never had a good answer to it. So I can't be particularly optimistic they'll get it done in the next few days. But Mike Johnson, he's given it a try, and it's going to be all health care and Epstein next week. So I don't know if you want to come to work, Joe, but that's what it's going to be.
I need a nap. The Hyde Amendment, of course, bans the use of federal funds for most abortions. Rick, could that in itself keep this from happening?
It could. It's a poison pill, right? If it doesn't get through because Democrats are able to stop it, then the conservatives will kill the bill. If it gets through, then the question is, can an extension on ACA get through? And if the extension on ACA gets amended onto the bill, that'll kill it with the conservatives. So, I mean, with so few margins in the House to work with, it's very difficult to see how they get to a point where they can report something out. And certainly anything they report out is dead on arrival in the Senate.
Interesting. Well, Jeannie, maybe this will get some people's eyes off the ball next week, whether it's health care or Epstein, as you say. President Trump is expected early next week, if not on Monday, to reschedule cannabis, which is an idea that he has floated and kind of pulled back on, which would be a pretty major deal for some folks who voted for him, thinking that he would be more friendly in this matter on the march to legalization. Pot stocks went crazy today. The MJ ETF was up something like 40% because this would lower the tax burden on cannabis companies. Is that something that might take progressives' eyes off these other stories?
You know, I think it is something the president has been flirting with. It is something I think he's inclined to do. I'm not sure it's going to change his, poll numbers, which are just going through the floor, particularly on the economy. But it may help in terms of some of the young people who were supporters of his, who seem to have dropped off. So maybe around the margins, but I don't see it having a big impact. The biggest issue confronting him is the economy. That is it. He's got to address it head on. He can't find a way to be empathetic with people. He's pretty good at channeling anger, not empathy. And I don't know how he moves forward on the economy unless he's able to find empathy and stop talking about a stock market that most people aren't invested in.
Interesting. Tony Fabrizio, Rick, has been working for the pro-marijuana lobby. Pro-cannabis American Rights and Reform PAC has donated $1 million to a Trump-aligned super PAC. Several cannabis companies donated to President Trump's inaugural fund. Are Republicans comfortable with this?
It's exactly what you were just describing a little while ago, Joe, about the fight within the party. It's a 2-to-1 issue within MAGA and the Republican Party against legalizing or rescheduling cannabis. I mean, sure, as Jeannie said, there may be some younger voters that associated with Trump that like this issue, but this is a classic. The lobbyists got to the politician, and it's just going to create another rupture within MAGA that he's gone soft on cannabis. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't question the policy as much as I question the timing. At a time when you've got a lot going on within your party and you're not finding a lot of common ground, why stoke it with throwing a little more fire on the fire pit?
Well, does it have to do with what the president has been talking about otherwise? I mean, if next week is health care and Epstein, why not go for it with marijuana?
Because it's a net loser within your own party and you're just stirring the pot. I mean, you think about it, you're going to have this war on health care, and we've been losing that. Now you're going to create a war on pot. And by the way, what's the upside? You think Democrats don't have an advantage with their voters on this issue? He's just rewarding Democrats with this policy. And so, Republicans looking to run for re-election are scratching their head going, how's this going to help me?
Jeannie, that is an interesting idea on the midterm campaign trail. And by the way, we're just showing you a live view of the Oval Office. That's a lot of 10-gallon hats. The president just signing an executive order a short time ago. If the president remains underwater on the economy going into the new year, Jeannie, we saw an AP poll this week that showed a new low. 31% people think that he is handling the economy well. Will there be more stories like these? Reschedule cannabis and so forth.
There may be, Joe. I'm just waiting for you to pull out your 10-gallon hat while we watch all of those guys right from under your desk. I think we will. I was struck by Peggy Noonan had a piece out today saying Donald Trump may be losing his touch, and it was very reminiscent in my mind of something she wrote, and this goes back a bit, about George W. Bush. I think it was like 04, 05. She is quite a prognosticator. The reality is he has got to get his hands around the economy. You can't go on and say you are all about tariffs when they're not working. Say you're going to take millions of dollars and bail out farmers. Keep telling people that the stock market is good and they should just be quiet and not buy too many dolls for their kids on Christmas and build golden, ballrooms and have great Gatsby parties. I mean, he is completely out of touch on the economy. His little dalliance in the Poconos this week didn't do much to assuage any Republicans. He's got to address this. That includes healthcare, as we were just talking about. The president is, for all intents and purposes, the leader of the Congress. He's got to get in there and say, this is what we're going to do. Otherwise, Republicans are facing a very, very blue, in more ways than one, 2026. And that is for sure. So, I'm not sure these stories about cannabis are going to do much at all to help him there. Maybe with the Elon Musks and Joe Rogans of the world, but not much else.
Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Great conversation. I hope you both have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday. Bloomberg Politics contributors. Coming up, President Trump says the U.S. would be willing to deliver assistance to Ukraine as part of a security agreement to end the war with Russia. We'll discuss how that might impact negotiations this weekend. Coming up with Hagar Chemali, former National Security Council official, with us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We'll see whether or not we attend the meeting. We said we'll attend the meeting if we think there's a good chance of they want me to attend, they want us to attend. And we'll be attending the meeting on Saturday in Europe if we think there's a good chance. And we don't want to waste a lot of time. We think it's negative. We want it to get settled. As you know, in the past we spent could be $350 billion giving it to Ukraine. We got nothing in return, but we gave it to Ukraine.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. The president there yesterday toying with the idea of attending this weekend's latest Ukraine talks in an effort to renew the pressure between Ukraine and Russia to secure a peace deal. New report out today from AFP quoting a senior U.S. official that says the plan would be for Ukraine to join the EU in 2027, something Russia has long been against. Joining us now for more, Hagar Chemali, founder, CEO of Greenwich Media Strategies, and former director for Syria and Lebanon on the National Security Council in the Obama administration. Hagar, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. President just now in the Oval Office made an offhand remark that a lot of progress was being made on Russia and Ukraine. You don't think he gets on a plane this weekend, do you?
I don't think he's going to get on a plane this weekend, but his folks might. I mean, I could see Secretary Rubio or Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who've been working this, getting on a plane. This, if anything, what's fascinating with this is that things are progressing mainly because President Zelensky is trying to play his cards the best way possible, right? He's engaging, even though the 28-point peace plan that was offered a few weeks ago was really, frankly, pro-Russia. And Russia was going to stand to gain the most out of that. And so, but Zelensky is still showing his willingness to engage, countering back with his own proposal that shows that he's trying his best to work with Trump and trying to compromise. And that in the long term is really going to work out in his favor. But I don't expect Trump to jump on a plane this weekend, no.
Okay, well, interesting, because we've been hearing a lot about Ukraine recently, and there's been talk of President Zelensky coming back to town at some point. And of course, we saw this 28-point peace proposal shrink to something like 18 points once Ukraine got its hands on it. You've been involved in the peace process before, Hagar. To what extent will this continue to evolve?
Sure. Well, I mean, in that regard, it's normal, right? It's normal to come out with something first and then for that to be whittled down or for it to change. The fact is that the original 28-point peace plan really crossed too many red lines for Ukraine. Things like preventing them from ever applying for NATO membership, whittling the size of their military down to a size that was way too small. And most importantly, ceding land in the east of Ukraine that Russia does not currently control. That is a major no-no, not just for Ukraine, but by the way, in the negotiation of any war. And so to end any war. And so that said, though that plan really did come off to a lot of us. And by the way, it appears to Secretary Rubio as well, because he's the one who quickly got his hands on it and quickly tried to soften a lot of those points. It came off to a lot of us foreign policy experts as pro-Russia, as leaning too favorably toward Russia. Right. So the fact that Zelensky came back, so now he's compromised. He's been able to increase the size of the military, get rid of that point about not being able to apply for NATO membership. But the 2 points in particular that are hallmarks of what he is coming back with is, number one, he's not willing to cede land that Russia doesn't currently control. But that means he's open to other parts of land. And then the other piece is that he's demanding U.S. and European security agreements, guarantees in case Russia were to ever attack again. And frankly, if I were him, I would stick to my guns on that one.
Interesting. Hagar, it's really something, this moment in time, as the president seeks peace in Ukraine. He's beaten the drum in the Caribbean. And it's been pretty remarkable to see some of the actions most recently leading up to the seizure of an oil tanker. But of course, we've seen the destruction, strikes against alleged drug boats, more than 20 of them, I think, at this point. And big questions about the policy, questions about the legality. And there's a new movement on Capitol Hill to address congressional war powers, something I talked about earlier today with Congressman Jim McGovern, the Democrat from Massachusetts, introduced a war powers bill a couple weeks ago. It looks like it'll be ripe to hit the floor next week. Here's what he said.
I think it's oil, quite frankly.
Yeah?
I think this president is not about promoting human rights. He doesn't give a damn about democracy. And this is not about drugs. I mean, he pardoned the former president of Honduras, who's one of the biggest narco traffickers in the world.
Hundreds of tons of cocaine.
So I think, there must be some financial interest in pursuing this policy for the president, because that's all he really cares about.
That's the view from a Democrat who is a critic of the president. Of course, there are a lot of members on Capitol Hill who support what's going on right now, Hagar. Do you see a piece of legislation like that having any chance to pass?
Yeah, well, so first on what McGovern is saying, he's lacking a lot of nuance. I mean, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but that's not what this boils down to. I mean, the goal.
You don't think it's about oil?
No, I mean, I think. Listen, let me give you the broader strategy of this. The fact is that Trump, yes, President Trump wants, as is very common of a MAGA foreign policy, which is quite isolationist, he wants something that benefits the United States. So it's not just oil, it's actually also mines that have not been, vast resources that have not been mined yet in Venezuela. So it's both, right? And we can absolutely, that is a key feature of it, but it's not the only feature. What is landing us in the current strategy is an entire policy that was crafted by Secretary Rubio. Rubio cannot stand the idea of doing an economic deal with a dictator, one whom Rubio believes, rightfully so, also props up the Cuban communist regime. So he views the fall of Maduro as interlinked with the fall of the Cuban regime. So he went to Trump and said, listen, you don't want drugs. This is a big thing for a hallmark of your policy, of your administration in general. And you want these economic resources for the United States. That's what drives you. Fine. I have a way of having our cake and eat it too. I want to go after Maduro, and this is the strategy I propose, right? Threatening military action, thumping their chest, also targeting the shadow economy that props up Maduro, because there are all these other benefits there related to democracy, human rights, the fall of these dictatorships. So it lacks nuance to say, I'm not saying that McGovern is entirely wrong, but he's also not right. It lacks real nuance to say that it's only for this reason. It's all of it all together. It's a package deal that comes in general. And it's fascinating because you're seeing Maduro be quite fearful. He is trying to make deals with the administration, and because he is genuinely afraid. And those deals have been rejected. The latest one was a few weeks ago. And the Trump administration said no. And the reason for that, apparently in that deal, Maduro was offering access to the economic resources, and the Trump administration said no, which undermines the point McGovern is making.
Well, I appreciate your adding your experience to this conversation, as always. Hagar Chemali is founder, CEO, Greenwich Media Strategies. Good to see you, Hagar, and thank you. Quick programming note, be sure to tune into a brand new Wall Street Week with David Weston tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Have a great weekend. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.